because I don't want to go backwards. I want to keep going forward. Together, that's exactly where we're going to go. God bless you.
I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
And this is Rewind, but this is a special edition of Rewind. JR and I are going to talk about the top 10 stories, the political stories, and others of 2015. And we want to welcome our house band, our house drummer, Henry Cerrugi. Oh, more of that later, Henry. Cool it for right now. Let's talk about, JR, some honorable mentions, okay, before we get to the top 10.
Sure.
Walker killed the Kenosha casino proposal. Now, he did it after votes, local referendums, we like it, we like it. Mm-hmm. After the Fed said, we like it, we like it. But talk about the day he did it.
Well, actually, for context, you have to go back even before that, because Walker has always been an opponent of expanding gaming. So when he first opened the door before the 2014 election of, well, maybe we'll take a second look at it, it's like, what is going on? Then the day he shuts it down was right before he went to Iowa to go speak to a bunch of activists who, by the way, didn't care for the idea of expanding gaming.
Right.
So on the one hand, you have to say Walker was never really a fan of doing this. On the other, might have been some political pressure or some calculation, if you will, about his presidential campaign, possibly. But I just couldn't see Walker, after he basically said no for so many months, all of a sudden saying maybe, then saying yes. It was hard to figure out what he was doing. What was it, other than maybe keeping that door open to keep Kenosha and Racine from being unhappy with him in the fall of 14.
One quick PS. Remember the conditions he set, that it had no additional gaming, had to be supported, and the tribes, there had to be unanimity, not a majority of the tribes. So anyway, what you're saying, you weren't surprised when he killed the Kenosha casino?
No, I was surprised when he opened the door to even like letting it possibly come back, or saying maybe. It's not like Scott Walker.
Okay, next honorable mention. Russ Feingold returns. No huge surprise there.
No, not at all.
But the poll numbers are fascinating. Ron Johnson is still unknown by what, 30% after 5 years?
Yes.
Okay, so talk about that.
Well, first go back to the 2000, I think it was 14, Democratic Convention of 13 or 14, saying, I won't be a candidate in 13 or 14 or 15, but we all knew basically at that moment Russ Feingold was coming back to run for his old Senate seat. That was no surprise whatsoever. He came on the scene right away in the spring, had a big lead on Johnson. But part of that was because he was viewed as a nonpartisan prism, if you will. He'd been gone for a while. He'd been like in this kind of State Department job, so there wasn't the old partisan view of Russ Feingold. Now that he's in, his numbers dropped a little bit, came back up, but they've been kind of consistent around 50% plus. Johnson around upper 30s for the most part. But what we're kind of seeing here is it's still early. What's going to environment look like next year? I would guess, from talking to most people, that whatever happens top of the ticket, the presidential race, it's likely that will reflect in the Senate race. Now, you would think Russ Feingold, because he's better known, would have more kind of a cushion, if you will, that if a Republican won Wisconsin next year in the presidential race, maybe Feingold could pull it off. Yeah. But it's really not likely. There'll be a huge gap between what happens in the Senate race and the presidential race.
Isn't this rated the tightest U.S. Senate race in the nation, JR?
Oh, it's one of the two most likely to flip. So
two most likely to flip.
Kirk in Illinois is number one. That is like he's not run a very good campaign so far. And then Johnson's number two. And part of it is just the nature of Wisconsin presidential year. Now, the caveats are, what's the environment like next year? Is it going to be a terrorism year, a terrorism election? Yeah. Republicans think that Russ Feingold has some vulnerabilities on that issue, and will go after him on that. So there could be some ways, but to capitalize upon that, Ron Johnson has to improve his numbers in the next 12 months, and that's hard to do when you've been in office for 5 years.
Honorable mention, and it grieves me that it's an honorable mention because it's such a tragedy. The record number of gun homicides in Milwaukee. And you saw some action in the Capitol to pass bills. If you're a felon and you have a gun, you know they're going to send you away. I'm just sad that this doesn't make the top 10. Your thoughts on that?
It is a constant battle between the people who think that guns are the issue and people who think that no, it's the people who are the issue, and that you have to lock up the people who are not following. And it's a circular argument that has gone round and round for the last, however many years in the Capitol. Once they passed concealed carry, that finally was off the table. And now it's about how many guns are out there and should there be more restrictions. And the likelihood is, no, there's not going to be any more restrictions in the Capitol. Scott Walker and Republicans who run the legislature are not going to pass some gun ban anytime soon or or any more restrictions what we have in the books.
Right. Another honorable mention, and you have to add context to this, the law that prohibits non-emergency abortions after 20 weeks. Now, here's why I list that as an honorable mention, because it comes in the context of all the other anti-abortion laws that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. So if this was just a standalone, I'd probably put it in the top 10, but I don't, because you have to see it in light of the other bills. Your thoughts on that?
Struck down by a federal judge, appeals court upheld that decision, but the Supreme Court will have the ultimate say. There's a Texas law, very similar, that the court agreed to hear earlier this year. Once that case is decided, then we'll know for sure whether that law is ever going to come back in Wisconsin.
Okay, and the last honorable mention before we get to the top 10, the new campaign finance code. And here's why I put this as an honorable mention, and thanks for agreeing with me. We don't know yet the wrinkles and the fine print and which of those lines or which of those changes is going to have the biggest effect in the 2016 elections. So until we know that, maybe a year from now, it'll be a huge deal.
Well, there are a couple of things. One, I think people have the perception that money is just this infinite resource in politics. It's not. There's a finite amount of money to be spent. It's where does it flow? It's like water. It'll find a place eventually. Now, you've seen a lot of explosion of third-party groups that don't have to report how they spend their money, who gives to them. Will people feel like, no, I'm going to give more money to the party, for example, now, or to candidates? Now, I think the thought from Robin Voss, who really kind of spearheaded a lot of this, was, he's Assembly Speaker, if I allow these higher contribution limits, the corporate limits, or corporate contributions to the party, that might give me more control over the message. That might give us a fighting chance to get these outside groups. But I don't know if that's going to work yet. I mean, we won't see until this next fall how it plays out. And oh, by the way, with the coordination, who really embraces it? Does anybody really go out there and really go, I'm going to work with Group X and be the test case, if you will, out in the open or whatever about coordination? It'll be interesting to watch.
But there are some major changes. You listed them. Corporations can contribute now. And the 4 legislative leaders, party leaders, they will be running new segregated accounts, and we don't know the effect of those. So, okay. All right, now let's get into the top 10. Henry, I need a short riff. Lead us into top 10. Okay, that's great. Top 10. The scandal at the Tacoma VA Hospital triggers an investigation, firings. Let's listen to some of that audio about that.
We're going to hold the hearing right here in Tacoma, Wisconsin, so the surviving family members of those veterans that died could provide the kind of powerful testimony that they did in front of the community, in front of hundreds of people in the community of Tacoma, and that made a big impact on the officials from the VA and the VA Inspector General's office. That's what's going to, I think, from my standpoint, I think that's going to actually lead to real reforms in that facility.
JR, I think this is number 10 because you have the tragedy of veterans being overprescribed and at least one death, and then you have the unique pairing of both Senators Johnson and Baldwin on this issue. Your thoughts?
We may not know the full extent of the fallout from the Tacoma VA scandal until 2018. The reason I say that is Tammy Baldwin, now there's mud on a lot of people's shoes in this issue, let's be clear.
Yes.
But Baldwin got from the brunt of the coverage early on, and she's up in an off year in 2018. So like with Ron Johnson fighting a Democratic trend, if you will, in Wisconsin in a presidential year, Baldwin faces a much less hospitable environment in 2018 when Republicans have a better shot. So if this can stay with her, if this does stay with her, Republicans can capitalize upon it, it could be a big issue for her in 2.5, 3 years. So that's something to watch. It's a to be determined, if you will, how big a deal this is.
But the tragedy, I think, makes it number
horrible.
10. Okay, Henry, take us into number 9, please. Thank you, JR. I would vote this higher. This is $250 million in public funds for the Bucks Arena. Let's listen to some of the debate around it before you and I talk about it.
It's important to remember that what we're talking about is it's cheaper to keep them. The price of saying no is at least $419 million.
Not only do we want to create a championship caliber team on the court and a championship caliber team off the court, but we really want to invest in the future of this state and specifically the future of this city.
When I look at an opportunity to catalyze development at this scale in the Park East, I think this is well worth the investment that we're talking about.
Who wouldn't want a $500 million public works project paid for with $250 million of private money?
All the taxpayers in the state of Wisconsin are going to be responsible for this. And it's really
I respect
hard.
that very much.
And I think that's why it's such you know, it's such a difficult thing in our caucus because we all come from different districts.
This should be a locally financed project. And, you know, and I just disagree with both our state chief economist and others in the legislature as to the fact that this is of statewide importance. I'll grant the point and be the first to say it loudly. It's an extremely important issue for Milwaukee.
JR, I was tempted to put this in the top 5. Given the context of Miller Park in the 1990s, cost Senator Petak his job, that Brown County raised the sales tax to help the Packers. That was a different model. Here you have $250 million, half of the cost of that arena. We're helping billionaires, excuse me. So what are your thoughts?
There are a couple of things. One, the number of players who had kind of skin in this game. I mean, Chris Abele pulled off a nice development. He was a more willing partner, if you will, at times than Tom Barrett was, at least from the perception of Republicans in the Capitol. Governor Walker is in this position of, they don't want to lose the bucks. That would be embarrassing to him, but he's also moving a presidential campaign and trying to argue for putting public money into a private company at that scale, if you will, which is a little bit interesting to watch. So you have that going on. And then you have to look at history. In Jim Doyle's last budget, they put $5 million in the budget, the capital budget, for a scoreboard for the Bradley Center.
Bradley Center.
Now they're doing $250 million. Granted, it's a mix of state and local money, but still $250 million for an arena. What I thought was fascinating was the votes in the Senate and the Assembly. They were bipartisan. Democrats from outstate supported it, as did Republicans. If I'm at Tom Tiffany from up in northern Wisconsin, that might be a vote that I come back and see in an ad next fall. And why wouldn't you? Now, there's a discussion of, does it blunt the effect of that ad because Democrats supported it? I don't know. You know, but it's interesting. I also see a couple Milwaukee lawmakers vote no.
I wanted to come back to that. Yeah.
So the dynamics were fascinating about that entire thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. It was number 9. Okay, Henry, take us to number 8. Wisconsin passes and becomes a right-to-work state. Now, here's why this is in my top 10. JR, this was not debated during the campaigns of 2014. If anything, the governor said, okay, I don't really think it's a priority. But anyway, let's listen to some of the audio around this issue.
A ballot will be introduced for extraordinary session to introduce right-to-work legislation.
We're taking up a bill that could result in probably larger crowds than what you may anticipate.
No matter if we won or lost the last time, we keep showing up.
Act 10 was wrong for public sector workers, and right to work is wrong for all workers.
The public needs to talk to legislators about getting down to business, about getting down to creating jobs, about getting down to increasing and enhancing the economy of this state, not wishes and whims of ALEC.
I think this is going to be something that is going to have a direct impact on the manufacturing sector in Wisconsin, which is one of our big 3. So,
the bill before us today is going to drive down family wages. Workers in right-to-work states earn over $5,000 a year less than in other states.
Act 10 attacked public employee unions. Right to work goes after private unions. So we voted as number 8. Your thoughts?
Scott Fitzgerald drove the train on this issue. If you recall, a little more than a year ago, he went on Charlie Sykes' show in Milwaukee and basically brought this up. We're going to take it up. And that set this whole thing in motion and became a train they couldn't stop. There was, the governor realized the train was coming no matter what he said about it, that during the campaigns, never reached my desk, it's not something to worry about. They should be focused on my budget, other priorities. He realized this train is coming, got on board. Deftly, by the way, got on board. For Democrats, you look at this going, okay, every time we see wages going down or the economy's not going as well, they're going to say, look, they did right to work, they did prevailing wage, they've done all these, and that's not working. For Republicans, you're going, please, job numbers, turn around. What else can we do? They have done, since 2011, almost everything on their to-do list when it comes to the economy. Now they're talking about some more things, regulatory reform or addressing the skills gap. But if these things don't work, what's missing in Wisconsin's economy? That's a question I might have to answer come next fall.
Have Act 10, right to work, and prevailing wage pretty much decimated the ability of unions to play a major role in 26 campaigns?
Well, I mean, you can still get the national unions to have money flow through the locals. That can still happen. But as far as like raising money locally, no, it's not the same. Now, if you're an ASME, for example, the people who are left are the diehards. So they like to say they punch above their weight class, if you will, because they have people who are very dedicated.
There used to be 3 SMEs, now we're down to, excuse me, go
yeah.
on. Yeah, go.
But there's just not, WEAC used to be the counterweight to WMC, and it's not there anymore.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay, Henry, take us into number 7. WEDC, the gift that keeps on giving to journalists like us. So let's hear some of their audio on WEDC before we talk about it, JR.
The Legislative Audit Bureau released yet another scathing audit of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation.
It continues to be difficult to assess the accuracy of WEDC's jobs-related information. We found that the October 2014 report did not contain clear, accurate, and complete information on program outcomes, including the numbers of jobs created and retained by WEDC's programs.
The Audit Bureau report points out that we're not following the law at WEDC, that WEDC is not even following board policies. This is unacceptable.
Because the audit, frankly, caught you. The audit caught it caught enough instances where the letter of the law wasn't followed.
The building committee loan, which we're going to talk about in a second, is just one of 30 WEDC awards that were made without any underwriting whatsoever. This was never told to us as a board. That obviously puts taxpayers at much greater risk.
Those awards should not have happened. We've taken swift, strict action against all of those.
But I still don't understand why they happened in the first place.
WEDC's response to our attempt to fulfill our fiduciary responsibility as board members is one more indication that Secretary Hall does not take his responsibility for the situation at WEDC seriously. It is clear that WEDC needs new leadership. Therefore, we are requesting that he step down as WEDC Secretary and CEO.
The early problems of the first 2 years, 2.5 years, the ones that were highlighted by the very critical audits, problems of mismanagement or political motivation. And the reason I ask about political motivation is the emails that I've seen, the Secretary of the Department of Administration would call employees of your agency to ask about a specific loan or grant for building committee. Mismanagement or political motivations?
Perhaps a little bit of both.
So much of this WEAC mess fascinates me. You had the former Secretary of Administration, Mike Hipsch, lobby, get in the face of WEDC employees, where's that loan, to a Walker contributor. You had the continual turnover of senior staff, and you had WEDC failing to do due diligence in terms of checking on the credit records of the applicants and checking on the jobs created. So I've said too much. Your thoughts?
A couple things. Republicans and the GOVS people still feel like there was a bad foundation for this and that they erred, if you will, in rushing it through that. Remember, the 11 budget basically created this thing in an instant, if you will, commerce to WEDC right away. That never got a good foundation in place to fix these things, and they're still paying the price of that in some ways. Now, you'd argue that after 4.5 years, why can't you fix the problem? That's the Democrats' issue. Like, look, this excuse comes over and over again of, oh, we're working. Well, at what point do you fix it? Now, the issue is a couple of things. One, Republicans are telling you, we will not go back to the old Commerce Department. It was a train wreck, in their words. 2, joint finance, including the budget, a phase out, if you will, of the loan program. Now, they did that to maybe do a new loan program next biennium, but for now they're trying to say, hey, end of 2017, we're done with this, we're going to figure out something different. And then you have these continual fallout where at some point you got to stop the bleeding and fix the patient.
Well, let's stay on WEDC just a little bit longer. When you couple the mess at WEDC, and it's still a mess, with the failure to create the 250,000 private sector jobs that the governor promised in 2010, do you see this as a top issue for Democrats next year?
Well, it's interesting. They've talked about the open records law, the GAB, campaign finance changes. These are all part of the arrogance of power. But they can't just say corruption over and over again and win. They're also trying to talk about, like the Senate Democrats, their blueprint for Wisconsin, these economic bills. Peter Barker talked about, I think, a dozen or 15 bills that some of the Dems have put forward. Now, they're not getting much attention because they're in the minority, but they have to have a checklist, if you will, of things that we're doing to address jobs. For Republicans, they keep pointing, look, unemployment's down to 4.2% as of this week, a low since what, I can't remember, until 2001 or something like that.
Okay.
But
2001, 2004, somewhere there.
There's this weird juxtaposition of all these big headline job cuts with an unemployment rate that is down. Like, what is going on? Is there a lag or a disconnect or what's happening kind of thing? And so it's a conundrum for Republicans who are going, we've done so much, what else is there to do, if you will?
Okay, resident House band, take us into number 6. Major changes at the Supreme Court. Voters in April say the justices should elect a Chief Justice. Out goes Shirley Abramson after what, 19 years?
19 years, yeah.
19 years. Chief Justice Pat Roggensack. Then when, in September, Pat Crooks dies, and he's replaced by Rebecca Bradley. Let's listen to some audio on this.
And trying to change the Constitution to get rid of or make the Chief Shirley Abrahamson less powerful is another piece of evidence regarding that, if you will.
The judges are non-partisan.
Understood.
But we decide individual cases on the basis of the legislation you enact. Our job is to interpret and apply your laws fairly, impartially, neutrally, and in a non-partisan way.
First of all, I think it is a misnomer to say that voters elect the Chief Justice as the Chief Justice. But it does seem to me that the current Chief Justice has lost the confidence of a majority of the court.
The citizens of the state of Wisconsin elected her. So the real question is, did the citizens of the state of Wisconsin lose confidence in her? The answer is no.
I mean, it didn't occur to me that Justice Abrahamson would file a lawsuit to go against the will of the voters. 53% of the voters decided that this is what we should do. And you know, this is what states are doing throughout the United States.
I believe, in our looking at the applicants that we had and our choices here in the state of Wisconsin, that absolutely 100% Judge Rebecca Bradley is the best person to be on the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
I'm really looking forward, as I said, to working with each of my fellow colleagues on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. I've enjoyed my judicial tenure and have been able to get along very well and very collegially with my colleagues on the Circuit Court bench and on the Court of Appeals, and I expect to have the same positive working relationships with each of my new colleagues.
I am. There's no if. I am going to be a successful Chief Justice during my 2-year term because I'm going to work very hard at it. I'm going to give it my all, and I think together we will make really quite a difference for the Supreme Court.
Major changing of the guard on our Supreme Court, or no, because the hardcore conservative majority stays in place?
Well, a lot of the power that Abramson still had was administrative, if you will, setting the agenda in these conferences. So she was able to frustrate, if you will, the conservatives at times with what she wanted to do. But yes, they're talking about somebody, the Chief Justice for 19 years, being replaced. They're also talking about a court that shifted to the right. Justice Crooks, he sometimes was labeled a swing vote, but really he wasn't that much of a swing. He was fairly much a conservative on a lot of issues, but on certain things he would back, mostly on procedural stuff, back Abramson and Bradley on things, or go with them. So it solidifies a conservative majority, now makes it 5-2. So in addition to Abramson not having the Chief Justice title, she now has one fewer ally, if you will, in the court. Bradley's up for re-election, or retention, I should say, in April. If she wins, you're talking about solidifying the majority that much more. It's a total change, if you will, from the court was when Lewis Butler was justice in 2008 for a loss of Gableman.
Putting Rebecca Bradley on the bench gives her an inside advantage in April to when she's up for a full 10-year term, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, you could also, Judge Kloppenberg, who's running against for the primary, the four-way primary, has tried to make it the case that Rebecca Bradley is Scott Walker's hand-picked candidate, essentially. He's appointed her to the Milwaukee County Court, the Appeals Court, and now the Supreme Court, you know.
Right.
But the reality is, next spring's election, it's going to be dictated a lot by what happens in the the presidential race.
Presidential race.
Because if you have a primary on one side, not the other, you're talking about maybe Republicans being energized to turn out, and Democrats saying, well, Hillary Clinton, let's just assume, has won the nomination as of February, whatever, so what's my point of turning out in April? I don't have to go. But if you got a Cruz, Rubio, Trump death match going on, that will get Republicans out to the polls in droves, and that would help up Bradley. So that dynamic may be more of an impact than anything else come spring.
That's a very good point. We have that presidential primary. That's also the same day of the April election? Okay.
Go back and look at 2008. In 2008, we moved our primary to the February election.
Yeah.
I think almost twice as many people turned out in February as in April. If the primary had been in April. You still have Justice Butler, not Justice Gableman.
By the way, what are you hearing? I'm hearing from court insiders that Roganzak has generally done a pretty fair job in her first few months as Chief Justice.
Interesting that there was a conference a month ago, less than
Yes.
that, where Abramson had just dropped her lawsuit, or her appeal, threat of an appeal.
Yes.
And Roganzak went out of her way to praise Justice Abramson. Maybe that helps thaw some of the ice. And you haven't seen as many open battles, if you will, during the open conferences, but there's still some tension there, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay, little drummer boy, take us into number 5. Excellent. The state budget. It was late because of the impasse over transportation. It cut the UW funding, more drug testing for public benefits. Let's listen to one part of the debate on transportation first. But this curious provision, an additional $350 million, subject to the approval of the Joint Finance Committee. What's going to be WSDOT's timetable? First of all, are you going to recommend borrowing the full $350 million? Maybe that's the first question.
Yeah, I think it's our hope that we certainly can use the money and put it to good use on our transportation system. So I think we want to ultimately request all the money.
Underneath Act 55, there's $350 million of bonding that was authorized, but that cannot be released for use without the approval of the Finance Committee.
Poor Secretary Gottlieb spent much of 2014 talking about this sustainable funding and even made a budget request that raised revenue, only to be left hanging by a governor who only has one trick when it comes to paying for things: issuing more debt.
This is a very tough vote for us, but we're not going to kick the can down the road right now. We're saying it's time to look at this unsustainable transportation budget. It's time to say we can't keep going on spending and spending and spending. We think that the trend lines are unsustainable, that the revenues are not keeping up with our expenditures. We want to find a way to a sustainable solution, and we look forward to having a bipartisan effort, Senator Urbanbach, to sit down and work this out, come back in January with a proposal that we're going to stick together, so in the next budget we'll have a sustainable transportation budget.
One of the options that's before us that you didn't mention, Senator Urbanbach, is tolling. Now, any studies I've seen or polls I've seen, actually tolling is one thing that actually we can actually get a majority of the people of the state of Wisconsin to be supportive of. It's a true user fee. It's only paid by the people who are using the system, not by people who are up in northern Wisconsin and seldom leave God's country. It's a true user fee. We're going to take a look at that.
Jared, one of the most fascinating joint finance votes this year was 10-6 to authorize the additional $350 million borrowing, because it was the 6 Assembly Democrats plus the
6 Republicans.
Thank you for correcting
6
me.
Republicans.
6
in the
Assembly Republicans, thanks. 4 Democrats voting against the 6 Senate Republicans. Explain that to me.
Senate Republicans throw the idea of borrowing in the first place. And they said they would want to kick it down the road, kick can on the road, but they have essentially. There is no clear option to fix our financing for transportation in the next biennium, because Governor Walker has said, as long as he's around, no tax hikes, no fee increases. So what do? Either you borrow more or cut back, or find a revenue source, or offset that revenue source with a tax cut somewhere else. I don't think we're going to have a lot of GPR laying around in the next budget that won't go toward Medicaid, schools. So we are still in the same situation come 2017 as we are right now. The budget for me, I'm not going to lie, would have been higher, but that's because I spent all those days and nights and early mornings in the finance room, watching it over and over and over again. But this budget is interesting because of all the ones I've watched, now it's not unusual to have a budget be late. I mean, I think in 2007 was it that Republicans had this Assembly, Dems, the Senate, Governor Doyle. It lasted October. But since Governor Walker and Republicans took over, they've prided themselves on being quick with this thing and getting it knocked out before July 1. This one, not only did it take until middle of July, but joint finance broke for an entire month. Just said on a Friday night, we'll see you soon, and then didn't come back for a full month.
Because transportation funding.
Transportation, prevailing wage was an issue they had to figure out.
That's true.
The bucks in or out. And then you had it really ripped open with a wound of the tension between Governor Walker being gone and Republicans back home. I think freshman rep at one point got up to the floor and called it a crap budget. That quote made him famous in a lot of national publications because it just epitomized that tension, if you will. Now, Republican lawmakers said publicly that Governor Walker was just as engaged as he was before, but you could just sense the tension of, we have these problems to figure out, especially in transportation. We're not sure he's going to be around, and he's sticking us with this bad situation on long term on roads that won't get fixed in the next budget either.
And let's listen to a little bit of the debate over the huge $250 million cut over 2 years in the UW system. Let's listen to that.
As you know, the cut to the UW system totaled $250 million. That's a very large cut in a one-year period.
The public was opposed to these cuts. I think 70% of the public opposed the cuts. That's really encouraging to me, and the reason it is because there is a devaluing of higher education across the country. The public is seeing less and less value in higher education, and I find that very troubling.
Our cut that we had to sort of start working on effective July 1st was an $86 million hole that we had to fill. More than 50% of that hole is going to be filled through internal budget cuts. And it's important to emphasize that because my campus is feeling that across the board in every department. Those budget cuts are not costless, and in many places they're causing some real pain.
Let's wind up our discussion of the state budget, which we have ranked as number 5. This last-minute, 11th hour attempt to gut the open records law. It didn't pass because it was yanked within, what, 48 hours?
They basically said, yeah, we're going to pull it out.
Okay, but that was a huge part of that budget debate because that resonated not only with the Common Cause groups, but some people out there literally contacted the legislators, said, this stinks, take it out.
Could be an issue next fall for sure. Now, for all the tension I just talked about with Governor Walker, let's not forget that Governor Walker got a lot of stuff he wanted in this budget. In fact, he got, as all governors do, 90% plus of what he wanted. He talked on the campaign trail president about the drug testing aspects, about property taxes being flat. Now, they went up a little bit, but about his property tax proposal. I mean,
Expand choice vouchers statewide?
He got all kinds of, now, they reworked the funding for school choice expansion, but he got a lot of what he wanted. I mean, so for Walker, he may have taken some flack back home about it, but he really got a budget that he wanted and was improved in some ways from his perspective by lawmakers because of funding for choice, things like that. Now, he lost, what, $500 million in bonding for roads, UW Authority. I mean, he won a lot of stuff in that budget.
Yeah, he did. Okay, Henry, take us into number 4. Thank you. JR, you may say that this one, the John Doe issue, the federal and court judges shutting down John Doe 2, and then the narrowing of the scope of John Doe's. You want to come back to that in a little bit, but let's listen to some of the rhetoric about this debate because this was a big change.
If this bill is passed, Walker says, gentlemen, I'm a candidate for President of the United States. This puts my integrity at issue. The pundits will say I signed a bill to end an investigation of me. That's what they'll say, gentlemen. Think about it.
And when you think of, the John Doe process, it has a much greater ramification beyond the political speech area. These are different crimes. These are not bodily harm crimes. These are individuals who are engaging in that most inherent right of political association and involvement. And you as a prosecutor, you as an investigator should hesitate before you start using tools that you may use in another sort of context and thinking that you can do it here without a much greater burden of proving that there's some sort of wrongdoing.
Did GAB do anything wrong when it got involved and authorized this investigation?
Well, again, the board's authorization was based on credible evidence presented to the board. 5 judges, we were missing one at the time, voted unanimously that this merited an investigation.
Since territorial times, the John Doe probe has been a highly effective investigative tool. Presently, the Republicans have introduced a bill which will exclude politicians from investigation by John Doe probe. In essence, the Wisconsin Republican legislators want to place themselves above the law and beyond the reach of John Doe probes.
The John Doe statute needs to be reformed because it allows for unconstitutional investigations. It curbs free speech, and it is ripe for abuse.
So the Speaker is absolutely wrong. The bill carves out those crimes that are more likely than not to be committed by politicians or their supporters. You have created a tool and left it in place for some, and you're deleting it for others. And the folks that will benefit from its deletion are the people in office and their supporters. It's not a talking point, it's the truth.
So if you're the Democrats who have railed all afternoon against this bill, you're okay with the tactics that were employed by the SS and the Nazis in World War II and Pol Pot and every other regime.
What are you talking about? That John Doe 2 was so terrible. What about John Doe 1? What about those 6 people, the allies of the governor? They went to prison. They had to plead guilty before they were convicted. Was that an okay John Doe?
But we are going to fix this. We're going to make sure that our state is upholding the Constitution of the United States and that we're not trampling on people's rights. So shame on us that we didn't do this earlier. But I'm glad I can say to my constituents tonight and to my kids, we're taking a vote in favor of the First Amendment and in favor of the Constitution.
JR, you take an investigative tool that our DAs have used for more than 100 years, 120 years, I don't know, and you narrow it and you say now future John Does can only be used for violent crimes and off limits are political
campaign finance violations.
Campaign finance violations. I just think that's a big deal that travels separately from number 3, which we'll get to in a minute. So
Well,
let's just talk John Doe.
A couple things. One, there was almost zero drama. The state Supreme Court shut down the investigation in July.
In July.
I mean, whether it's because we all believe there's politics at play or that's because it was clear law, whatever your perspective is, it was pretty much a done deal. So they got their hands on it. That was going to be the decision. The investigation was undermined in a lot of ways by Judge Peterson because he said, look, I'm looking at these subpoenas and going, there's no evidence here to support a crime. We have a giant gray area, or at least had one before, of what campaign finance laws were in Wisconsin. That's now been rewritten, as we talked about before, to clarify things. But this whole probe was conducted in the kind of gray area, if you will, of where is this the Wild Wild West or what? So there's that piece of it. The political piece of it, I don't know that voters really were craving a overhaul of the John Doe law. But Republicans, there was obviously a reaction to the investigation of Governor Walker's campaign and conservative groups in the recalls that led to this. The tactics used by the prosecutors, well, whether you agree with them or not, the idea of people who are operatives having their homes, searched, early morning raids, as they like to call them, things being seized, questions about the tactics. Those are things that they just thought were outrageous in how they conducted themselves. Now, in the end, there was some political damage to Governor Walker over the course of this investigation. Questions were raised. He survived, got reelected in 2014, not much of a problem. But going forward, there are still ways to investigate crime, political crimes in Wisconsin. This tool isn't in the toolbox anymore.
But I think our prosecutors are still sorting out the effects of narrowing of John Doe.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to cite this example, the Lincoln Hills investigation, the school for boys. I mean, there's a question whether if that had happened in the future, you could investigate misconduct in office. I'm just saying that there are some loose ends.
Well,
to
there's
this
been a
John
great
Doe
change.
changes.
There's been a great change in what you face. If you're a lawmaker, of what you face, because remember the home rule now, that's been in place for a while, that if you're charged with a crime, you can be tried in your home county. Someone argued Scott Jensen got a better deal in Waukesha County than would have in Dane County if he stayed there.
Because he waited it out like, what, eight years?
Things like that. So it's a much different ballgame, if you will, for investigating political crimes in Wisconsin than it was a decade ago.
Okay, Doctor, take us to number 3. Number 3, dismantling of the Government Accountability Board. This was a big deal. Before you and I talk about it, JR, let's listen to some of the public debate in the Capitol, in and around the Capitol. Would you resign to save your agency?
If the most important thing to the legislature is to get rid of me, they did that once before.
They think we're a rogue agency, that he and others, kind of feed us a line. Nothing could be absolutely so false.
If there are some things that could be done better, that the structure of the agency could be tweaked, but to just eliminate and go back to the bad old days makes no sense to me.
Maybe the easiest way to say it is what is your relationship or with Lois Lerner?
Seriously?
Yeah.
Have you no decency? That is like right out of the McCarthy era to ask a question like that.
You can refuse my question, Director, but I will ask the question. And I believe it's relevant to my line of questioning,
Well,
so that's up
ask
to
me
you.
a question that's relevant to my work.
I just did. Are you refusing to answer it?
Government accountability boards
actions over these last few years have been a stain on Wisconsin's reputation for clean and open government.
Let me repeat that. We will transform Wisconsin's political system from one of the most open and transparent in the nation to one of the least.
We see the Government Accountability Board as a failed experiment, one that while it was very well intentioned, it's now been seen to be a colossal failure.
I'm sure of one thing, that the era of clean, open, and transparent government in Wisconsin is over.
For years, for decades, we had separate elections and ethics boards. Then, in light of the failure, what was perceived as a failure to actively investigate the caucus scandal, this hybrid GAB was created in 2007 and took effect in 2008. Retired judges who have run for office should sit on it. What's your view, your thoughts on the dismantling of something of the cop on the beat? You're firing the cop on the beat who was around for 7 years.
This has been a long time coming for Republicans. This goes back to the recall elections in 2011. They were unhappy with how those were conducted, the way they were run. And the GEB all along, if you go to every controversy that's happened, like the design of the ballot last fall, for example, they've said we're following the law. And Republicans keep saying, we don't think you are. We think you're out of control, that you're doing things on your own. We think that the staff is running this agency, not the board. These retired judges who are nonpartisan, they're being led around by the nose by the staff and being pulled into bad positions. Democrats are almost as adamant that they weren't happy with the way the recalls were done either in 2011. So what's interesting was you hear Democrats kind of defending the agency and like the idea of the GAB, but none of them want to die on the hill for that agency because they're unhappy with it as well. It's part of being the referee, if you will. You're going to make enemies. But for Republicans, this is like just one thing too much. And this is just like with John Doe, the changes, this is also reaction to the John Doe investigation that touched Governor Walker, that this was too much, just too much by this agency. Rogue agency, out of control, that was their words over and over again.
Okay, but this is a big deal because we don't know yet whether the new elections and ethics commissions will work or whether they will be as knotted up at 3-3 votes of the SEC. So this was just a big deal.
Remember, the majority of people in the legislature right now never had to deal with the elections and ethics boards. They have come since 2007.
Good point.
This is going to be a unique experience for them. So we may be back here. It is a to be determined. We may be back in another 8 years going, okay, what do we do now?
Right.
You know, but we'll see. So.
Okay. Okay, Ringo, take us to number 2. I love it. Thank you. Number 2. Congressman, 1st District Congressman Paul Ryan, elevated to U.S. House Speaker, the first U.S. House Speaker from Wisconsin. Let's listen to some short video clips in which he talks about that.
Our party has lost its vision, and we're going to replace it with a vision. We think the country's headed in the wrong direction, and we have an obligation here in the People's House to do the people's business, to give this country a better way forward.
To me, the House of Representatives represents what's best of America. But let's be frank. The House is broken. How reassuring it would be if we actually fixed the tax code, put patients in charge of their health care, grew our economy, strengthened our military, lifted people out of poverty, and paid down our debt.
Paul Ryan, the Republican vice presidential candidate, in 2012, gets Ways and Means. Boehner self-destructs. Kevin McCarthy self-destructs. Ryan. Now, I want your thoughts. It seems to me he's declaring victory because we have a 5-year transportation funding bill, and now he's just staved off a government shutdown. Has he had is he still
excellent.
honeymoon time?
Excellent. I mean, I remember I was driving, took a Friday afternoon off to go meet a buddy, and then the news about McCarthy was kind of percolating and Ryan's name came up. Just got an email from his staff basically like, absolutely not. He will not run for Speaker. He became quickly the only guy to do the job. I mean, it was clear that the only person who could cobble this kind of unruly caucus together and lead it forward was Paul Ryan. He was drafted into it, if you will. What's been interesting is he said, on my terms, I'm going to spend weekends at home with my kids. For the Packer game on Sunday at Lambeau Field against the Cowboys, I am not going to travel to fundraise constantly. I will be a great communicator and the messenger guy, but I'm doing this on my terms. And he's done it so far. And oh, by the way, he's restored or getting close to restoring, kind of, they call it normal order or regular order in the House, where they had 3 days to read these the bills that passed today and yesterday, the tax package, the spending package, or stay off the shutdown. They had time to read them. They are allowing input from the caucus. it's a little bit of honeymoon still. But when you talk to operatives, they're like, this guy has done a masterful job for his first month and a half or so running this caucus. And if he hadn't, there's a thought that the party could have cratered, if you will, and lost control of the House next fall. So he really is kind of a savior in some ways.
Okay, but I looked it up. Paul Ryan was born in 1970. If you look at the tenure of U.S. House Speaker since 1970, it's 5 years and 3 months, something like that. Do you see him staying in that job that long, or is he going to be sucked down into the gridlock and impasse that we've seen in Washington?
That's an excellent question, because the dynamic will change. Right now, Republicans have a common enemy in President Obama. What happens after next fall? Let's say it was a President Clinton. Is it still Republicans rally against President Clinton? What if they have a President Cruz, Rubio, Trump, whomever? Now they have no common enemy. They have to govern as Republicans and do everything. How does that work? Will the conservative caucus be emboldened, if you will, to say, well, look, either it's President Clinton, we got 4 years of her, we're going to go to the wall, if you will, on what we want, consequences be damned, or if there's a Republican president, say, we've got the keys to the car, let's drive this thing. What will that dynamic be like, and how will he manage them then? There's a perception that Ryan is not somebody who's going to be Speaker for life. He is in his 40s. He has time to run for president if he wants to. I don't know
I'm
that
glad you got there. I agree.
I don't know if he burns to be president, but it's also hard to go from being Speaker to president. And there are people who will tell you that Ryan closed the door to running for president by becoming Speaker, because that's not a good launching pad in this country for that position. So that's all down the road. But so far, it's been a really good review, if you will, of Speaker Ryan.
Okay, we finally come to number one. Henry! Okay, thank you. Governor Walker's 10-week run for president. Now, you and I had seen him shaping it up, not making it official, and then after he signs the budget, that was late in July, and I think you told me, because you keep track, he ran for 71 days. Let's listen to his announcement in and, out.
Working together, we can fight and win for America. Thank you for coming out. God bless you all for being here. God bless our military, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
Today, I believe that I'm being called to lead by helping to clear the field in this race so that a positive, conservative message can rise to the top of the field. With this in mind, I will suspend my campaign immediately.
JR, how are we going to answer the emails saying this was not the top story in Wisconsin? Because you and I agreed that it was.
Well, I think that Ryan has a longer impact, if you will, than what Walker's presidential campaign, but it so dominated everything in the Capitol. I mean, looking at the impact on Wisconsin politics of the past year, what else comes close? It impacted the budget. He was gone a lot. There were constant stories about his calendar, about how engaged he was. And let's be honest, the 71 days is a misnomer in some ways. The day after he won re-election in 2014, he was talking about or thinking about, okay, the presidency, what do I have to do? They were already starting to figure out, what are we going to do? How do we run? He was in the day after he won re-election for governor. And you saw a shooting star of a campaign. Because remember, it was interesting that the dynamic on Walker, the line on him was back in January was, this guy is going to be Tim Pawlenty Part 2. This kind of milquetoast with Midwestern governor. What's this guy got? Well, you and I have watched him at convention, state convention. He gives a good stem winder. He knows the base. Gets up there in January, this Iowa kind of cattle call thing, and gives his speech talking about the recall, about the protests, about somebody threatening to gut his wife like a deer. You could hear the audible gasp in the room when he started telling these stories. And that all of a sudden he was catapulted to the front. And much like with Weedick, that bad foundation, you had a bad foundation with president's campaign because they had to move so quickly, if you will, to capitalize on that momentum. There wasn't the foundation in place to like have him bone up on foreign policy. I mean, he was working very hard at it, don't get me wrong, but it was such an intense meat grinder immediately after that that they made mistakes after mistake after mistake. And the guy who was a straight shooter all of a sudden started to come, well, he seems like he's trying to cater to somebody here and flip-flopping here, and he's comparing, well, he says the protest prepared him for ISIS here. What's going on? And the message discipline that Scott Walker has had, that when we knew him in Wisconsin, Scott Walker, the guy was rock solid on message, started to kind of slip away a little bit, and it became the wall with Canada. And whether it was the media, you know, kind of taking things a little bit out of context or whatever you want to say it was, he never helped himself, if you will, after those first few missteps, get back on track.
I voted for this at number 1 because we had seen Governor Walker at this level, and then there was the recall challenge, and then all of us, many people in Wisconsin, like him or not, can he play at the national level on foreign affairs? And by the way, you and I watched the first 2 debates he was in just to see how he did, and he didn't shine.
No.
So, and meanwhile, he was gone, and that allowed Speaker Voss and Senate Majority Leader Fitzgerald to take the lead on a lot of the budget issues. So I'm sorry, this was a number 1 story in Wisconsin.
No, absolutely. And the thing that Walker has to do now, he's got a checklist he will ahead of him. 1, can you prove his poll numbers? That guy, the line on Walker before he ran for president was, his supporters will walk across broken glass and vote for him. The people who hate him will walk across hot coals to vote against him. But it was 49 for him and 45 against. He was locked in. That's how he got to 52%, because those undecideds went, well, you know, my taxes are staying flat on my home. My schools didn't close after Act 10. This guy, things are going okay. Now he's at 37, 38%. How does he recover from that? Because people have lost some faith. Now, part of that was Republicans going, I wasn't happy about the presidential run, Governor, you know, so once you get me back in the fold, I'll be okay. But the moderates, the swing voters, do they ever come back? He's been dropping hints about running again in 2018, which he very much could. He could even run with bad numbers because Democrats don't have an obvious person running against them. But he's got to get an agenda, a clear vision. What's he going to do next? I mean, he's talked about some things on radio this week about, like, you know, what he might do. But what's left for him? You know, what's he got to do? Where's the passion going to be? Because Governor Walker has burned for this job, has been good at it, like being the technical part of being governor, has liked it. Can he capture that again and be as rock solid as he was before? Those are the big tasks for him.
Okay, we've gone through the top 10. Let's do one more task. Wisconsin Eye asked people to complete a SurveyMonkey poll. You pick, people, your top 10 choices. And I just want to go through how they disagreed with us, JR, really quickly. Those respondents to our SurveyMonkey poll, which was unscientific, we don't proclaim that it is scientific, they voted the state budget cuts number 1. We had that number 5. They voted dismantling of GAB number 2. We had that as number 3. They voted right to work as number 3. We had it as number 8. They voted John Doe changes, narrowing the scope, as number 4. We had it as number 4. They voted campaign finance, which we had as an honorable mention, number 5. They liked the WEDIC problems deepening as number 6. We had it as number 7. The Supreme Court changes, they had it at 7. We had it at 6. The reemergence of Feingold against Johnson, we had that as an honorable mention. They had it as number 8. And Walker quitting the race for president, which you and I just talked about, is numero uno. They weren't as impressed. So they had it as number 9. And finally, the new limit, the 20-week prohibition on abortion unless it's an emergency situation, which we had as an honorable mention. They had as a number 10. I welcome these ideas. How come we got it so wrong?
How do you know we're wrong?
Okay, where's the dissonance?
You know, obviously there aren't many Walker fans taking the poll. I would say that's why he's number 9. But I mean, you can't deny he is still the biggest figure in state politics in Wisconsin. He's got to get his mojo back, but he's still governor. You know, at least barring something crazy happening next fall, at least for a couple more years. So.
Okay. Well, that's our top 10. Thank you, those who participated in the poll. And next week we are going to pick winners and losers for 2015, and maybe a couple predictions for 2016. Henry, take us out. Okay, Dr. John. I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.